Hey everybody, I see some familiar faces. Eric and I have been emailing a little bit, and uh, Mike Halpert, a fellow Cubs fan like me, we've been emailing too. So it's really good, Peter, and my fellow moderators too, and Bob. But anyway, thanks very much for joining this, our first SABR 19th Century Book Club discussion group. I think we'll have a great time. I look forward to the succeeding programs chaired by our other moderators. I I read Spalding's World Tour thoroughly, took some notes on it. I think it's a really good book for a discussion. I've got some pros and cons about it, and I really look forward to hearing your thoughts about that. But one, is a very well-written book, I think, and also there are such decided opinions on Spalding. And my God, it's hard to be completely unbiased about Spalding. So I think it'll be some good, lively conversation, I think. Interestingly enough, I looked at the Hall of Fame's website on Spalding, and it said that he was quote, an accomplished ambassador when it comes to the tour, and he was a quote, a trusted supplier of sporting goods. Well, Mark Lamster seems to be more direct and covers Spalding warts and all, and I have comments on this, and I think you'll have some comments too. So anyway, we'll get started. I've got questions and thoughts about baseball history, about the tour, about Spalding and players, about the brotherhood, and I'm sure you will have others too. And for our discussion, we have such a small group here. I don't think when you're going to need the hand signal buttons to speak. Peter and Bob and I were talking about that. Feel free to chime in. But as Bob wrote, everybody, as per all our committee discussions, just be respectful, excuse me, in terms of language, and be aware of not dominating the conversation. So anyway, let me get started here. And I wrote down a whole bunch of thoughts I had while reading the book. And I thought a real plus of the book, and I've got more pluses, more pros and cons, was how the author weaves baseball history, and for that matter, history in general, around the whole major events of the book. I was just fascinated by this. He covered early baseball, the National Association. I know Mike's written about that, the American Association, and all in a very lively fashion too. And I thought he did I'm no expert on this, but I thought he really did a good job with this and set the whole stage for Spalding and the World Tour. And I just want to know what other people thought about all that too.
I thought he even went so far as to remark that baseball was the game itself. Baseball, it didn't come from rounders. It came from the game in Europe.
Yes.
Which apparently he'd read the Black Book.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it'd be easy to be biased about Spalding, either for or against him, but I thought the author was fairly impartial, and I don't know whether you say he admired Spalding, but I thought he was fairly impartial. There's a one quote I want to mention at the end that I thought he kind of gave a little, maybe an unfair dig about, but other than that, I thought he did a good job. You know, he painted them warts and all, and again, I thought it was a very well written, very well researched book. Any comments on that? Now, are there any new perspectives on Spalding? Did anybody learn anything new about him or the tour? I personally thought the phrase the ugly American was on full display here, and I have so many examples about that. The players were somewhat loud, they were boisterous, they were a little bit on the arrogant side, and you know, Spalding wanted to introduce baseball across the world, but I don't think he did it himself any favors at times. Like in the one game against England, they scored 18 runs in a game against England, and I don't think it helped their cause much. And so that's what I personally really gained from the book, was more about Spalding's behavior and more about the players' behavior too.
Who would have set up what the players encountered in each city? Would it have been Spalding? Would it have been the city? Would it have been a combination? Does anybody have thoughts on that? Because, and the reason I ask is that every time you turn around in the book, the players are drinking champagne.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Clico. It's not, $4.22 a bottle. My sense was overall that the players were treated like wonderful ambassadors. And therefore, while I think your point is interesting about the conduct of the players and were they the ugly Americans or not, it's almost like they were invited to be the ugly Americans because they were put on a pedestal in some ways.
Yeah. That guy. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was saying in support of that, I think that kind of the one that kind of stood out to me the most was when I guess Spalding was actually sitting next to the Prince of England, kind of like,
Oh yeah,
slapped him on the knee. It's like, yeah, no big deal. Americans.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Chris. Yeah, I remember that too. That guy, what's his name, Leighton Lynch or something like that, and again with an L. He was the advanced man, so to speak. He was kind of a noted theatrical producer or something like that. But I don't know who gave him his marching orders. And all that.
They probably could have said something a little more about the advanced men and what they did and how they did it, because it does sound like they did a good job.
Yeah, that's a good point, Woody. I wish he had done that too.
I would presume that Spalding, that the advanced man worked for Spalding. Therefore, with Spalding having the apparent business acumen that the book suggests he had, he would have, you would think he would lay out a plan. He certainly laid out the countries, and you should have, if you pick some number of countries to go to, then you have to study those countries, I would think, and understand what the culture is, how to fit into the country to make the baseball game interesting to people, and not just who are these people visiting.
Yeah.
I thought it was sort of an arrogant approach, because they thought they'd go into these countries and they'd suddenly all be playing baseball based on this tour. And if Spalding hoped to capitalize for his sporting goods concern, how he didn't make any attempt to sell the other products that he could have, the games that they actually played in these countries. It was strictly baseball.
Yeah. Mike, do you have your hand up there? Oh, I guess not. I thought his.
Sorry, no.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess
Susan
not.
looks like somebody else has their hand up.
Okay. Anybody else? Peter? Yeah.
Susan has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Susan.
You're muted,
You're
Susan.
muted, Susan. Yeah.
We are judging them, the players and their behavior on our standards now. But we need to remember that the time of this tour, behavior was generally much more formal. So the players' antics, if they seem a little strange to us, would have seemed even more unusual to the most people of that time period.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, Susan. And while reading this book, the Mark Lamster uses the word banquet as a verb a couple of times, and like there was too much banqueting there, and they didn't play well the next day. And I guess the people in the newspapers, especially, really gave them hell about it all and everything, which kind of surprised me, because they were the goodwill ambassadors, but they weren't too pleased with some of the with how shoddy the game was, and they didn't go all out, in other words.
Well, if you ate a 5 or 6 course meal with a couple bottles of wine each gentleman, you're probably not going to play real well.
You're right. And for Spalding, with all his, he was in charge of the Cubs, of course, and with all his anti-drinking rules, I'm surprised I have to admit, I was kind of surprised about that he was kind of let them all party as much as he did.
It surprised me too.
Yeah.
It's kind of surprised me also, especially with the Cap Anson also being his right-hand man. Figured the two of them would keep the plays under control. but you like see pictures of them on the Sphinx, and they're like standing on it and like throwing things at it or throwing things off the Sphinx and stuff like that. So the players, like in certain cases, behaved not very gentlemanly. Maybe it was from all the drinking.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe probably King Kelly got him all drunk. Who the hell knows?
that's right. And also trying to play baseball at the Coliseum too. They got
Yeah, I
a
heard
lot
the
of-
players were upset. They didn't realize you can't play baseball in the Coliseum.
Coliseum, yeah.
It was like wooden planks and stuff like that. It
Yeah,
was renovated at the time.
Yeah.
They thought they can just go there and play, and the players couldn't understand, why can we play in the Coliseum? It's not fit for baseball, not even close to it.
I guess you can write your initials on it nowadays, but not play baseball there.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's about 2,000 years old. I mean,
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Well, for a very long tour, if Spalding had imposed his rules or tried to impose his rules during the tour, he made for a very long tour.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We were talking about the advanced man, and I never really got, and maybe I just didn't read it carefully enough, but when do you think Spalding planned the whole world trip? First was going to be Australia, and then it was going to be the world. And I think and I read a couple different sources. So I think maybe this one said that he told a few people in advance, and then he let it slip and let it gradually come out. But do you think he planned this right from the very beginning, that it would be the world trip, or just maybe later on?
Well, I'm almost finished reading the book on John Wood, and from what I read, it sounded like they're only supposed to go to a few countries, but I think they decided to expand it during mid tour. That was the feeling I got.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, that was a burning question. I read this book a long time ago, and but I distinctly remember having this burning question of, did he really, just plan initially to go to Australia and then flip around and just come back? There's additional insight. I'm sure Jim will talk about it when he covers Blackguards and Red Stockings. There's additional insight that this is really Spalding's second overseas tour.
It was.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
It went in 1874 or something.
Yeah, 74, right.
Yes, in 1874 he went to Great Britain and didn't have much of a success there.
No, that's what he said. It was a real disaster, in fact.
Also, I mean, of course, the sun never set, particularly in 1889, 88, 89, the sun never set on the British Empire, right?
That's right.
I went to high school.
Was it, and you can see that in the tour, to some degree, hitting the, Samoa, hitting New Zealand, hitting, of course, Australia, and then going on to Ceylon and India and so forth. So there's a little bit of insight that way. And of course, ending up at the Great Britain.
Yeah.
I've sort of thought about that for quite some time, since I finished the book a few days ago, and I've thought about that a lot because from a business perspective, first of all, he had to coerce and cajole or somehow entreat the players he wanted to join the tour. And he wanted, I would think he would want better players so that there would be a better showing in the games being played. And so to ask these players to go away for 6 months, a combination of asking somebody to do something they've never done before and do it for half a year as opposed to 3 months.
3 months, yeah.
That's a little harder. And then if you put on top of that, the advanced work that has to be done in each city to prepare, and even if he had an advanced man, to have one advanced man while he is out of the country, Spalding is out of the country, communications back then were not what they are today. And so trying to communicate back and forth between Spalding and his advanced man and all the different countries that advanced man had to go to, if he had just set it up, if Spalding had a bright idea while on the trip and decided to double the length of the trip. And it did mention that Spalding wanted to keep it quiet while on the trip
Yeah.
and sort of release it slowly so he could stir some excitement among the players,
Yes.
and they would be enthusiastic about being on a longer trip. Oh
Right.
boy, we get to do more of this than we thought. So I have no idea for sure, but if I had to bet, I would bet that somewhere prior to or early in the beginning of that trip, he decided that it was going to be 6. He would try for 6 and see how the advanced man came, because he had 3 months to get a sense of how successful he was being, where he was going, as well as how successful the advanced man was being in the business side of this and setting up hotels. And I mean, they always seem to stay at very nice hotels and have very
Sure did.
and things like that. And you don't walk into a capital city and suddenly have that made available to you.
Yeah. They even had a couple parades, as I recall, even parades and a lot of free time to do what they want
Yes.
and everything. Yeah. Now, Mitch, you mentioned you're reading the book by John Ward, and John Ward, I found some of that kind of confusing here because, John Ward was beating heads with Spalding, but the author
And
of
that's
the
what I
book,
don't understand why he even agreed to go.
yeah,
Between his fight with the Brotherhood and his relationship with his wife, Helen Dovre, plus he was seeing this other woman, Jessie McDermott, on the side. Very full plate, so I'm surprised he would even go. That really surprised me that John Ward would even go on the trip.
Well, Mark Lamster says that he wanted to go. He wanted to chit chat with Spalding, get his thoughts on things. He kind of viewed him as an empathetic person because of his baseball career.
Yeah, but he knew Spalding was dead set against the Brotherhood.
Right, yeah.
So what could he have gotten? He knows Spalding was dead set against the Brotherhood. He was like the biggest enemy of the Brotherhood. So what was not stupid? He was a lawyer. I mean, he's not stupid.
He's not stupid, right?
Why would they make him think that he could persuade Spalding to soften up? I don't know.
Yeah, that really can kind of.
And that was a freaking lawyer for crying out loud. I mean, he wasn't probably one of the smartest ball players in the world at that time.
And then Mark Lamster doesn't really.
Plus, you're dealing with a wife and dealing with a girlfriend.
With a girlfriend, his plate was kind of.
He was married to this Helen Dovre, who was an actress, and then he was seeing this other girl, Jessie McDermott, who was also an actress. While married, he had a girlfriend on the side.
Yeah. And then when the
brush, maybe he wanted to get away from the two of them. Who the hell knows?
And when the brush classification plan was revealed, of course, I'm sure John Ward was upset, but I wish Lamster would kind of, talk a little bit about, how were their relationships at that time then? Because here he said he was going to try to be buddy with Spalding, but then when the classification plan was revealed, he doesn't really go into what their relationship was like that, although he does say that Ward and the others kind of met in secret to talk about the classification plan.
I think he let other guys talk about the Brotherhood while he went away. And then the plan came out where the highest salary was like $2,500 and all the players threw a fit. So I don't know what should have been. I think what should not have gone on that trip. He should have been focusing on his personal life, the Brotherhood, and his marital issues, and not be on that tour, because there's no way in hell he's going to persuade Spalding to go along with the Brotherhood. So I think he wasted his time going on that trip. That's my opinion.
Jack, there are a lot of questions pop over that. When did Ward find out about the salary program? I've read Egypt, I've read Britain, and then he just wanted to get home because that came up. There was also the issues that Spalding did Spalding ask Ward, because he was a late joiner to the tour, to get him out of the country so he wouldn't.
That's exactly right.
That was part of the plan.
That was part of it.
Was to get Ward out of the country. And Ward fell for it, which I'm surprised given Ward's acumen, and his intelligence. But I think that was part of Spalding's plan to get Ward away from the Brotherhood. And it worked.
Right? But again,
also on the Brotherhood leadership, Ned Hanlon. So putting him out of the country, they did double duty.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Helen was also well
That's
involved.
right.
But
Yeah.
I think the vice president of the Brotherhood was Tim Keefe, and he was gung ho to oppose that and to organize the folks because he was close to Ward being in New York at the time with the team.
Yeah. Yeah.
With regard to Ward thinking he could smooth talk Spalding, you get the impression the guy had a real big ego. And that might have been, he just.
Who had a big ego? I think both of them did.
Good.
Ward and Spalding both had big
Oh,
egos.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was no shortage of egos on this tour.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, he saw, Lamster said in passing, in fact, speaking of egos, that Spalding wanted to get all these bigwigs on board, like the sports writers, and there were a couple other people, I think, because
Yeah.
he wanted to kind of let the players know that, hey, I'm in charge. I know all these influential people, and I want to control you all. And that part caught me when I was reading the book too. You know,
Yeah,
that,
I think that part worked for Spalding, definitely.
yeah, yeah. You know, so.
And then it came out later on that Buck Ewing was sort of like a traitor to the Brotherhood. He tried to work out a peace deal with Spalding without telling Ward about it. And that made Ward and Buck Ewing enemies.
Oh, see, I didn't know that part. Yeah.
Yeah, Ewing was
Guess
trying to like work out a peace plan behind Ward's back with Spalding, trying to work out some kind of a compromise. And then Ward found out he was furious.
Yeah. So how much of the trip was about promoting baseball and how much of the trip was about promoting Spalding and his various enterprises?
Probably both, 50-50.
Both 50-50.
Well, promoting baseball would help Spalding and
Well, help
Buckley.
Spalding anyway,
100%
yeah.
Spalding, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Promote the game, it
Same
promotes
thing.
his business.
Yeah,
So
well, does
it's all about
anyone,
Spalding, really.
does anyone know, I mean, the book continues to refer to Spalding and his sporting goods company. And
Yeah.
I mean, you know, as a kid, I knew the name Spalding and sporting goods. But back then in the late 1800s, does anyone know what his company, what kind of sporting goods equipment his company was selling? What were they the
balls,
primary
bats,
baseball equipment?
yeah, everything. Balls, bats, catcher's masks, uniforms, everything.
They also were involved in bicycles. They were in
Yeah.
boxing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
equipment.
Yeah.
If they could figure a way that they could sell something, they would
That's
manufacture.
right. They're involved in a lot of
There
non-baseball items too.
was
Yeah.
an across the board sporting goods that they
Yes.
offered,
Yeah.
not
I
just.
think it was because they dealt with baseball inside for the winter. They put equipment for softball, what we would call softball today, and women's baseball, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they also produce the Spalding Guide to baseball every year.
Yep.
Yep, that's right.
Right.
And there are ads for his company in the Spalding Guide. I bought some of the reproductions of it, you know, those guides. And they'd have full page ads in the Reaches Guide too. And also the New York Clipper. I went through the files of the New York Clipper one time, and there were always ads in every issue for Spalding's company. And he supplied the official baseball, didn't he? Even too.
I think he
So
did.
that-
Yeah.
I think that
he
was
did.
right, yes. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he supplied it for the National League, and the Reach ball was for the American Association, but Spalding bought Reach out. So
That's
it was
right,
the same
yeah.
company.
Uh-huh.
I was saying one thing, I think Spalding also probably knew that maybe baseball was not going to take off in every single country, but yet he was still setting up all these sporting goods. So you have to think maybe he dabbled into some of the sports that were probably more popular in some of those locations, not just baseball, you would think.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking, oh yeah, Jim?
I have the book in front of me, so I'm kind of jumping around looking at it. So I did look up in the back. There's some, the page references of Spalding Sporting Goods Empire. And it does say at the end, gauging the success of the tour. It talks about how it was difficult. As far as financially, it didn't make money.
Right.
But it does say on his business, it had a positive effect, and he established distributors in Honolulu, Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, and European markets would soon follow. But it doesn't say if it was limited to baseball products, though. So I couldn't find if there was reference in the book. If I know as a kid also, it seemed like anything was Spalding. Any sport you wanted to play in school, the equipment had the Spalding. But for what that's worth, it did expand it was successful in that respect, especially for the cities where New Zealand and Australia had a bit of impact down there.
Yeah. Yeah. You said it lost money. I remember said that Anson invested $1,500 in it, and so did the Advance Man, I think. And of course, they did not get their money back or anything like that. Which one of the reasons Anson and Spalding were kind of at odds in the end of his life, and then when Spalding hired Jim Hart over him when he retired, that didn't help matters.
Thought that interesting. Spalding took these investments from these people who are not going to get the non-trip benefit associated with establishing business that he was going to get.
Oh yeah.
And so they lost money on their direct investment, as did he, but then he gained money in long term with these business contacts that the other people didn't have.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure Spalding was busy, pressing the flesh every chance he got,
Well, Spalding was an early example of a 21st century businessman. If you're going to lose money, make sure it's somebody else's money.
Well, that's right. Good point, Mike. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. The one thing that I really like, because I like history within I like specific history within the context of what was going on at the time, and I think Lamster does a really good job of that. I just was so impressed, like when he mentioned Spalding selling, Mike Kelly, and how the local people were so upset about the local Chicagoans because he was a local hero. And then Lamster said that this was a kind of a microcosm of the exploitation of labor by big business, which was true. And this was particularly noticeable in Chicago with all the immigrant neighborhoods, the worker organization. There was in the rally that led to the Haymarket riots and everything else. And he does this all the time. And I thought that was a real plus for the book. It kind of kept my interest, because Eric and I were talking about how, 56 games, you get kind of bogged down with 56 games. But what kind of kept me going, though, was all the descriptive, like when they were in Ireland, there was a guy, Manning or something, they had a big parade for him, and he got to meet his family, and they had clippings about him in their homes and all that. That just really piqued my interest. I saw the whole human side of all this, So. Even they worked in the presidential campaign, but again, on the negative side, there were all the different games, but then they talked about the sightseeing, the banqueting, even the small details about the stage falling down in Hastings, Nebraska. Did anybody else get caught up in the details like this? Because that's what really kept my interest going while reading it.
Jack, I generally find that's why I enjoy reading books from the older period, because it was a different time. There was no internet or TV, so the writers had to be more descriptive in their writing in general. So just the sources that are in the books. They do tend to, like you say, in the beginning, earlier on, you said how they Lamster and other authors do. They'll pepper their books with like what was going on socially at that time.
Yeah.
And if I recall right, that Advance Man, I think, didn't they kind of on the feel like sometimes they were flying by the seat of their pants, and they were just going ahead and adding a stop to a country last minute. And one thing that I found the details that was amazing is to think about the world then where you could just basically go to any country. There was no border limitations, or there was no concerns of travel. You could just decide to hop on a steamer and go to a different country, just walk right in. And it was a different.
There were no passports in those days.
Right. That's like you were saying, the detail and the history, that is amazing. My son went to School Island, and to think just to go there, how much it took to plan ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. These guys were out on sea. They didn't have an internet or email to like call ahead. They just would
They
go.
just went.
They
Everything
would
was
go and
everything
make
was
it
done by
happen.
Yeah.
telegraph.
And
Telegraph.
it was out by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, it's
That-
really, it's hard.
That goes back to
concept
the,
of.
that goes back to the point of the extension of the trip having to have some planning before he left the United States. Because with, as you say, with the lack of the communications that we rely on today, how do you get that done? How do you line up hotels? How do you line up
Yeah.
meetings with people and meals, things like that?
Yeah,
In
he probably
countries that quote unquote didn't even know you were coming, purportedly.
did a lot of stuff and didn't tell the players
Yeah.
ahead of time. He probably planned a whole bunch of stuff and didn't bother telling the players until it was too late, and they had no
Yeah.
choice.
One of the things that would be interesting, I'm not sure anybody on this call or even in SABR would want to take the time to do it, but it would be interesting to take the countries where Spalding took the team and write a one page on what baseball is in that country today, if at all.
Yeah.
Because that was supposed to be the idea, was an initial exposure of
Mhm.
people to the game of
Right.
baseball. Well, if that was really the centerpiece, why they were going to all these countries to show the world the game of baseball, I really wonder, and I was thinking the other day, I want to go back and list the countries, and I do have from my work and from some other things, I do have some connections in other countries, and find out what, is there baseball there today? And if so, to what extent? Is it a sport of interest? Is it something that kids sort of happen to play at, but it's nothing really organized or anything? I know in just my work took my wife and our new baby to Stockholm, Sweden in 1975 to 1978. And I'm a big baseball fan, and I presumed at that point that there was little or no baseball, but I thought I might run into somebody. So I was playing in leagues at that time. I was 30 years old when we went over, and I took a whole bunch of equipment, shipped that over there as well, extra gloves and balls and bats, and that in case I ran into somebody. And we got there in September, and so it's starting to get cold in Sweden already in September. And so I asked the people in the office, there were about 60 people in the office, and I was the only non-Swede. And I said, have you heard of baseball? Have you heard of baseball? And out of the blue, a guy comes up to me in early December that year and says, there is baseball in Sweden. And I followed it, and he gave me somebody to talk to. And it turned out, so this is 1975, there were 3 leagues, 3 divisions of 8 teams each, division 1, 2, and 3. And they had playoffs at the end of, so you played within the division, and then they had playoffs after the end of the regular season, where the bottom teams of Division 1 would play the top teams of Division 2 for the right to move up or go down. And so that would shift around. And they allowed 3 non-Swedes, so it didn't say Americans, 3 non-Swedes were allowed on each team in Division 1. Divisions 2 and 3, they needed some people to fill out a little bit more. I do remember that at that point, there were 3 Swedes playing in the minor league system for the California Angels. And I think there were a couple of players from the Netherlands playing in the minors in the States. The Dutch were the people, the Dutch and the Italians back then, if you were a Swede and you wanted to see how baseball is played, but you didn't want to have to come to America, you would go to either the Netherlands or Italy. They ruled the international, non-American, maybe non-Canadian side of the game. In fact, I've got here, this is Swedish baseball, the rules of baseball written in Swedish. And it's 71 pages long.
Yeah.
So it's not just this is a ball and this is a strike. And every player was handed one of these and was expected to follow.
Can Can you cite the infield fly rule?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ja pratar svenska, men inte polska.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you one quick story. My first, our opening game in the spring of my first season playing was a 3-game series in Leksand. Leksand, Stockholm we lived in Stockholm, and Stockholm was reasonably up north in Sweden, but Leksand is 4 hours north of Stockholm. And we went up there on a Friday afternoon, and we arrived in the middle of a snowstorm. And when we got to the field Saturday morning, they were plowing the field, plowing the snow off the field. And it was a baseball diamond and it had a backstop and everything. And, but I will tell you that I put liniment on parts of my body I never had before or since. And the bats were wooden and nothing did not sting when you used them. But it was, 3 strikes and you're out, and 3 outs, and that's the end of the inning and all that.
Yeah.
It was a real interesting cultural experience.
Yeah.
When did he start playing baseball in Japan? That has to go back to at least the 40s.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Mhm.
And the case Sadahura O, who played, I think, started like in the late 40s.
I believe there's some references to the 20s.
20s?
Really? Well, yeah.
Between missionaries and expats and various things.
I think it was more actually in the late 1800s. The missionaries first started baseball in Japan. I mean, by
Really? That far back?
the college.
I'm surprised Spalding's tour didn't take him over there.
I'm sorry.
I'm surprised Spalding's tour didn't go to Japan, wasn't part of the
Yeah,
tour.
well, that's a good point. Probably the
Yeah.
language thing would be for
Oh,
the
yeah.
advanced
Yeah.
people.
Well, that would be a language barrier, would be a barrier in any country.
Well, not for most of the countries it went to. They were part of the British Empire.
Oh, okay, yeah,
And
good.
the guarantee that, for example, the government officials were English speakers.
Yeah.
The major hotels and whatnot would be English
Yeah, that's
speakers.
a good point.
Japan,
Jim, you have
by the
anything?
20s, their
Yeah.
system of college and high school baseball was well established.
Mhm.
They could have brought a couple of translators along, I don't know.
Yeah, Jim.
Oh, Jack, I
Uh-huh.
was gonna say, I can't recall, and I'm gonna be touching base on a different book, but at some point ago, I read the book on Alexander Cartwright.
Oh,
So
yeah.
and that would have been in the 1800s where didn't he bring it as far as Hawaii? And then I don't know from there if there was a much closer connection, that there might have been travel with, I don't know, whoever might have come from Japan and brought it from Hawaii. There might have been a connection there, but that goes back 1700s. I
That's
mean,
right.
I'm sorry, 1800s.
1800s, right. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, Lamster goes into the whole Abner Doubleday, and of course he was so pro-American baseball and everything. And I would have liked to have, he talks about what newspapers thought of the players, but I would like to have seen if there was any, man on the street type of thing, what the ordinary person might have thought of the games. And nowhere did he say that. I'm not even sure if that would have been possible to find something like that. And what, I'm not sure if I didn't look at his sources, but they were in the book, but I wonder if he even listed, contemporary newspaper art. He probably used contemporary newspaper articles, but to see what they said. No, but I would have liked to have seen more about that. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, one of the sources that if anybody wants to read on and look at various references to the tour, Lamster's book is excellent, but I remember reading Cap Anson's autobiography, and he spends a great deal of time in his autobiography talking about the tour from a very personal perspective. He had his wife with him on that trip, and he talks about different dinners and things like that. And it's this period is they're departing in 1888. I mean, all through the 1880s, I mean, Anson has been Spalding's guy. When Spalding thinks that the team is drinking too much, as you know, Jack,
Yeah, yeah.
He put Spalding on the case, right? I mean,
That's
I mean,
right.
he puts Anson on the case.
And puts
that
answer on the case. Yeah,
that
he
was-
sure
he
did.
was his enforcer.
Yeah, enforcer, he sure was. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
There is no hint whatsoever. I would have to think that Anson knew what Spalding's longer plans may have been. If there were longer plans, I think Anson would have known it, and he was kind of sworn to secrecy
Yeah.
until everybody else was kind of brought on board.
Mhm.
And but Anson doesn't indicate in the book at all that, in his own autobiography, he doesn't say that he knew that the tour, was going to go beyond Australia.
I read that book years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. That's a real good point. No, something that Lamster said about Spalding and Anson, which I didn't really know before, is that we all know about Anson and the racism and the Toledo game and everything, but Spalding's whole purpose was to make money and to spread the allure of baseball. And if segregation was a part of it, he just kept quiet and kept his own counsel, while Anson, of course, was so open. And I think that the Lamster said something like, for better or for worse, Anson has remained a pariah, while Spalding kind of got off scot-free when it came to that. Which I'd never thought of before, but I thought that was a good
But Anson
point.
couldn't have done it alone. I mean, he was maybe the most vocal, but he couldn't do it by himself. Ban blacks from playing baseball. I mean, he had to have cooperation from the other team owners and team presidents and whatever, league presidents. I mean, even Anson was the most vocal. I mean, he couldn't do it by himself.
Well, that's I got into a big conversation with the Cubs historian Ed Hartwig about this, and Ed said. He said exactly what you said, Mitch, was that Anson was so disliked by the other owners and by people in baseball that if they wanted to get back at him, they would have disagreed with him on the subject of race. But the fact that they didn't sort of implies
They
then
were
that
racist
they went
also.
along.
They
They
were
all
a
went
little
along.
more less obvious about it. They were all
obvious.
racist.
Yes,
They were all racist. Just
Yeah.
Anson was more vocal about it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, in the 1890s, all white Americans were racist. There were very few people who weren't.
Yeah.
Anson just had a bigger soapbox than the average person. But
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely, there's no way that good black players are kept out of the league unless the owners are banding together to keep them out.
Yeah.
Anson was just the person who was speaking the most loudly, and he was certainly less refined than Spalding. Spalding was politically astute. He was a smart businessman. He
Mhm.
knew when to let somebody else say the things that he thought, and he didn't have to say it. So he didn't get tarred with that same brush.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Anson wasn't really very intelligent. I heard he didn't know, he knew baseball, but when it came to like business or running a business or anything financial, he was pretty much illiterate.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
He
I
lost
don't think he
money
was
in a
good in
lot
high
of different
school. He didn't
ways.
like drop out of school when he was like a teenager or whatever. He was never.
Yeah, he did. He did not go to school very long, and he was not a good businessman.
I know
And
his
he
father
went
lent him
broke
money, and then
shortly thereafter.
Anson father told, okay, figure out how much I owe you, and Anson was clueless. He had to go run to school, take a class in accounting to understand anything about finances. So this guy was basically, he had businesses. He ran a bowling alley. He had a root beer thing. And most of them are abject failures.
Yeah,
He
went.
a great
He
baseball
lost money.
player
all
and a
over.
great disciplinarian, but when it came to anything outside of baseball, he was kind of illiterate.
Mike, what else did he do? Didn't he run for city court or something like that too?
Yeah, he was a clerk, and he was a
Clerk,
business failure with that too.
Yeah,
The only thing
well,
he successfully was Broadway. He did some Broadway stuff, and he was pretty successful with that.
He didn't make any money on that either, though. Yeah, he was elected city
He was
clerk.
a sheriff or something, but
City clerk.
I don't
He
know.
was a city
City
clerk.
clerk,
He ran
yeah.
for sheriff.
city clerk, yeah, and he was
Yeah.
a failure with that, and they kicked him out.
Well, he was city clerk, and he figured out after 2 years that they expected him to work and to have all the people who were under him to work too.
Yeah.
And so he got pilloried by the Chicago Tribune and drummed out of office.
Basically, yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
I guess even George M. Cohen wrote a little piece,
Yeah,
monologue or
George
something
Cohen wrote
for him.
a
Yeah,
thing, yeah.
yeah,
He had some success on the stage.
yeah.
Yeah, he spent several years, the first several years, he was on the small circuit, you know,
Yeah.
didn't play into the big cities.
No.
But towards the end of his career, he and his daughter put together a Broadway show. He didn't sing or anything. He would just talk baseball. And
Oh,
Yeah.
one of the things he did, he's appear on the stage with the silver bat that he was given. And he would hit paper mache baseballs that he had given to the crowd. They'd throw
Yeah.
up to him.
Yeah.
And he did get on the Keith circuit, which was a major circuit, went to big cities. But basically the amount of money he made just covered all of his expenses. He didn't.
Yeah, he lived
When
with
he
his
died,
daughter.
he was
He
absolutely
lived with
broke.
one of his daughters until he died. He finally got a job working golf, and then he got sick and he died like soon thereafter.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
he
Yeah.
died absolutely broke. The National
Yeah.
League paid for his funeral, his hospital expenses.
He
his
refused to.
gravestone.
He refused to take pensions. He refused to take donations.
Right.
He was so proud. He refused any until this golf job came up. He's okay. Then now is a chance to I'll work for money. But unfortunately, a few months after, he got sick and died.
The just another the Keith circuit that is on was more than big. It may have been one of the top 2 or 3 circuits. Is what evolved into RKO, Radio Keith Orpheum.
Yeah, it was definitely the big time. I mean,
I
he was
didn't know
playing in
that.
the big time houses. He just wasn't a lead, you know, he wasn't the lead of any show, and he just wasn't paid that
Well,
much.
his
money.
daughters did most of the work. Yeah, I find also very interesting. There must have been something wrong with his Y chromosome. How is it that his 3 daughters lived normal lives and all 4 of his sons died at stillborn or infancy?
Yeah. Didn't
There must have been something wrong
know
with his Y chromosome.
that. Yeah. Mhm.
Jack, back on the tour, when they got to England, they had great hopes that here
They
is
did.
culturally similar countries. They speak the language, and they had cricket, which is in some thoughts modified baseball, or baseball is modified cricket, whatever you look. And it just, the British seem to kind of look down their nose at the sport.
Well, you know, Lamster made a
Not cricket.
telling.
That's why.
Yeah. That's
The British are very, very strong. I spent a lot of time in that country. The British are very strong towards cricket, and anything that you try to tell them is similar to or got something from each other in the games and that, they don't want to hear it.
Lamster says something like that, Eric too, is that he said that Spalding kind of blew it because they were so gung-ho about baseball. It kind of offended the British, who were so patriotic about their own cricket.
Yeah.
And that kind of got them on their hackles. And plus the players were so skilled, other countries thought it would be way too hard to learn, and so it was almost too much of a good thing. They played so well, they could tell it was took much skill, and also cricket's a long game too, isn't it, Eric? And they said that baseball was too short. Yeah, and they made the comment that it was just way too short of a sport for them. But you're right, Bob. Though, yeah.
These games, the comment was made, these games were over quickly. The games were not taking an extended amount of time.
Yeah.
An hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes.
That's exactly what Lamster said, about an hour and a half, right? Mm-hmm.
Well,
Brits may also have had an issue with a large number of Irish players that were on the tour.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, that's when they had such a good time when they went to Ireland. They got to look up their family. And everything too.
Right.
But at the very end, it's about almost 10 till, but at the very end, when they all got together for that reunion of sorts, and once again, and Lamster said there was no rancor whatsoever. Everybody was just one big jolly time. And I guess time heals all wounds, but I still would think that, I read a lot about the Brotherhood, and I would think they'd be kind of mad about Spalding, but they said I think he said it was devoid of all rancor and bitterness. And, that kind of surprised me too.
I don't know how many of you happened to see about the young man from Uganda.
Yeah.
Who came up to the Major League Baseball Draft League and played in that league. He's 19 years old. And came up and played in that draft league for about 6 weeks of the 8 weeks that the league is in existence. And I found that fascinating that, I mean, out of Uganda. And
Yeah.
we have some friends in Uganda, and I got a hold of them and asked them, is baseball in your he said, well, the younger people play it because Americans play it. And he said, it's really pretty informal. It sounded more like a wiffle ball game in the backyard than it did like an organized league. But there's a picture, the NBC put out a picture of this fellow, 19 years old, Dennis Kasumba. And I did happen to see that I think he had got about 19 at-bats and he struck out 16 times. So I think, and the mention was that the pitches were much faster than what he was used to seeing, and he was not that comfortable seeing a curveball. So
When was this?
I don't know who got him. Yeah, who is? I don't know who got him into this. He did play for 6 weeks or so in that Major League Draft League.
How long ago was this?
I wonder if with the
2 weeks ago.
Oh, this year. Oh, recently.
Yeah, this year.
Yeah. He had a trainer who played, I think, he had a trainer, I think, that played in Korea, where have been the trainers back there trying to develop players. That was kind of one of his first projects.
Yep.
That's really interesting.
But the trainer was from Uganda too, so there's been some baseball.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate hearing about that. That's great.
You know, when you read a book like this, you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
So when I read this book, of course, I was knee deep in researching and writing about Jim Mutry, who was the New York Giants manager.
Yeah.
And Mutry was very famous for walking up and down the baselines in the Polo Grounds, rooting for his Giants in the 1880s, and shouting to the crowd, "We are the people." Who is the people? And the response of the crowd would be, "We are the people." And Mutry was very, kind of famous for this.
Yeah.
In fact, one time John Montgomery Ward greeted him on the street that way, who are the people? Jim said back, "We are the people."
Yeah.
So where does that come from? Well, what happened is I'm reading the book, and there's a trip to Glasgow in Scotland, and there's a team in Glasgow. I think it was a religious affiliation, but I think it was a Catholic team. It was Catholics and Protestants, and the team, I believe, had something. I think it was soccer. The game was soccer, and the chant at the stadium was, "We are the people." Who are the people? We are the people. So I went back and scoured, that term, and that term was not used by Mutry until after this tour.
Oh, okay.
So there's
That's
no
interesting.
record. There's no record of it whatsoever prior to this tour.
Yeah.
So when you look at the participants of the tour, there are 2 New York Giants on the tour. And of course, John Montgomery Ward never got to that point on the tour of going to Scotland.
Right.
Came home beforehand.
Came home, yeah.
But Ed Crane did. And I have to think, it's speculation.
Yeah.
But you have to think that Ed Crane said, "Well, I heard this wonderful chant."
Yeah. Right.
And Mutry adopted it.
One of my favorite lines, we talk about John Tenner, who I've never heard of until I read this book, but he was later the governor of Pennsylvania, and he was a very successful governor. He passed all this good legislation, and some reporter said, well, this must be the best day of your life. And he quickly said, no, I once struck out Boston. Yeah. Well, everybody, we're getting close to about 9 o'clock here.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing I find fascinating about the tour is the banquet at Delmonico's.
Oh, yeah. I meant to mention
I read
that.
about the menu. It was like 40 items on it.
Yeah. That was a
when they
great
when
thing.
they return.
Yeah, they listed every in the Monty Wood, but then on the John Wood book, they list like all 40 items. They must have been good and stuffed and full.
Yeah,
It's
I meant to comment on that.
like
Yeah.
a page and a half, every item, like oysters, such all the way down to the desserts. It literally lists like a page and a half in that Brian Del Salvatore book of John Wood.
Wasn't Twain one of the speakers?
He was the
Yes.
keynote speaker.
Keynote
Yeah,
speaker, and
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt was
John
there
Mark Twain
too.
was the keynote speaker there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Teddy
think the-
Roosevelt. Yeah, Teddy
Yeah,
Roosevelt.
I looked at
was-
the Monagos. It's been around since like the 1830s. Now it's close to renovations, and it's taking. I can only imagine how expensive it is to eat there.
I think the Hall
I
of
have no
Fame
idea.
has.
It probably costs hundreds of, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars, especially that banquet. Love to have been a fly on the wall for that thing.
I think the Hall of Fame has a copy of the original menu for that banquet. It's got
Do they
page
really?
after page after page of all the items that they had
Wow.
there.
Yeah,
they really-
I've seen, there's a book actually that was put together like a souvenir or something of that banquet.
Yeah.
And it has all of these details about it. And I just couldn't afford it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Right.
Throw it at a baseball show. But
Yeah.
I was salivating, wanting to get
Yeah.
my hands on it.
I'm sure it was quite pricey. Yeah. Anything else, anybody?
Well, from what I understand, I heard the restaurant opened up sometime in the 1830s. Now it's closed for renovations. It's supposed to open up next month.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
it's like in Wall Street, I was like around Beavis Street, around the Wall Street area, somewhere down there.
Yeah, it's right,
Yeah.
it's right there at Beaver Street.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Beavis Street, yeah.
I
Okay.
was a young messenger for RCA. I was a kid.
Always been an expensive place to eat. Yeah.
Well,
I'd love to
Jack,
go there,
thank
but
you.
probably have to take out a
Yeah.
mortgage. All right.
Anything else, anybody? Well, this has
I
been a
have-
lot of fun, you all. This is our first one. I look forward to the
This
next
was a
one.
lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I'm happy it was.
We've
Yes,
got
sir.
3 more on the schedule that were in the newsletter and are on the SABR events calendar, but there'll be more even following that as we get, and these will change. We're kind of feeling our way through on this first
Yes.
one.
Uh-huh.
And
You'll
we'll
let
see
us
what-
know when the
what
next
evolves.
one is.
Yeah.
August 1st,
Yes.
I think,
That's
Peter.
soon.
So Jim, that's you, Jim.
Yeah.
Jim is up on August
Oh,
1st.
good.
If you want to say
Yeah,
a
I'm
few
sure,
words
I'm
about
sure
it,
Peter and Bill will
give
keep
us an
us
advertisement.
apprised of what's going on.
I'm sorry, what's the book for August 1st?
Go ahead, Jim.
The Black Cards and Red Stockings.
Okay,
But that
Bill
sounds-
Lysack's book.
Bill
Yeah.
Lysack's classic, right?
The first one that he wrote. He wrote backwards. He started with the Nats Association to the
Huh.
Civil War to
Okay,
baseball's first
Excellent.
inning.
Oh, that looks interesting.
He did better than Doubleday. I mean.
Yeah.
Can you get that book in in Barnes and Noble or whatever, or order on
You
Amazon?
could get it, yeah, you could just look at the fastest way
Okay,
to get
you
it
want to
is
show
through
that book
Amazon
again?
or AD.
Jim, want to show that book again?
Now, is that the second
Black Cards
edition?
and Red Stockings.
Yes, it is.
I'm not sure what edition.
Because my copy
is.
of that has a different cover, so
Oh,
I'm wondering.
There's,
Wait,
It's
Bill-
it
Bill
does
did
say the-
revise that book because it was like 15 years after he had done it. And he updated the statistics in the appendices, but he also corrected as scholarship has brought us forward on a
Oh.
number of things. But it came out about 2 years, maybe 3 years ago, the revision.
This
Yeah.
is the one, it does say, yeah, it does, right on the top, it does say revised edition, and it
Okay.
says revising a book first published in 1992, and then he's talking about looking back at any aspect of your life from 22 years ago. So what's 92 plus 22, right?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
60.
2014.
I wrote a review of that book
No,
for
yeah.
Baseball
2014.
Journal. Yeah,
Mhm.
it is a great book.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, Peter, you want to give us a close here and get ready for the next round?
Okay, I just.
So Jim, can you show me that book one
just
more time?
took-
Jim,
Yeah,
can you show me
yeah.
the book one more time?
Yeah.
Black
Black
Guards
Guards.
and Red Stockings. You gotta write that down. Black Guards and Red Stockings. Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
Black
It's in the
Guards and Red
newsletter.
Stockings. Thank you.
Yeah, and in a couple of weeks, you'd be able to read that, so it would work.
Yeah,
You know,
maybe I
you
gotta
can- you can make
order
it-
on Amazon or something. Get it there.
Yeah, you can get it through Amazon.
Yeah.
And we'll have, and Jim will be handling this discussion August 1st, correct, Jim?
August
Yeah.
1st. Okay.
August
I
1st.
wanted to come tonight so I could watch Jack and pick up a lot of
I know, right? Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm glad it went well. Thanks you all to you. I mean, you guys
Yeah.
really helped me out a lot and I appreciate it a great deal.
This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Didn't
It's a lot
even
of
take
fun.
my time yet, so you guys are like showing me what to do here.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Susan. Right.
Bob, you want to, why don't you say, you know, a few words here and
Well, we're gonna we'll close off tonight. We were a little slow opening because there was a SABR meeting immediately before us on the Zoom that went till 8 o'clock. So, but the others are on the calendar, and I don't think that we are in competition with anybody on that night. But the Jim's doing Blackguards and Red Stockings will be followed by Matt Albertson doing the groundskeeper, level playing fields.
level playing.
yeah,
And
August
then
24th.
Mr. Dr. Kreiner, a sporting time, which goes back into the pre-organized baseball into New York City and how competition in sport, it's a little broader, although focus is mostly on baseball, into sport in the evolving culture of the time and immigration and all of those sorts of things. So we think we've got some interesting things for everybody to participate in, and about every quarter we will announce the next quarter's doings. Thank you all for taking the time, and I hope to see you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Jack.
All right,
Everybody.
thank you. This is a lot of fun.
Was a lot of fun. I appreciate
done.
everybody's help.
Really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
Thank
See
you.
everybody.
Hey,
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.